Hi, I'm Adam, and my game studio is called Absurd Walls. This video is a retrospective / devlog of my game of Moons and Mania, which is about a real mental health crisis that I went through a few years ago. I'll try to keep the context brief. If you want to know the full story, I suggest you play the game. I think it's really good. Anyway, I had some really bad anxiety in college, which turned into panic attacks, which then turned into a manic episode. I spent some time in a hospital, was diagnosed as bipolar 1, and returned home. I spent the next couple of years in a brain fog that made me depressed and incapable of making games. But that changed around the time I had the idea for this game. My idea for this game was to use game mechanics to convey my mental state during my manic episode. I've always been fascinated by the school of thought that the meaning in video games is discovered by analyzing their mechanics. I like this idea because, as opposed to thinking that meaning comes solely from the narrative of a game, mechanics are something that are actually unique to games. Movies also have narratives. Books have narratives. Only games have mechanics. Because of this, I wanted to make a game where the story and the mechanics are tightly interwoven, utilizing the strengths of the medium rather than just slapping a story on top of some mechanics, even though the two are barely even related. By the way, there's a fancy name for the problem. It's called ludonarrative dissonance. For examples of games that I feel do a good job of marrying mechanics with narrative, I love the work of Nikki Case and her game We Become What We Behold, which uses a mechanic to explore the real-world issues of news cycles and cycles in general. And I was also massively inspired by the seminal Rod Humble game, The Marriage, which abstractly presents the dynamics of a relationship with no text or art, just gameplay. To model my thoughts, I envision them like a spider web, where each point on the web is a word, and your brain builds the connections from one word to another. The problem I had during the manic episode was not being able to control my thoughts, i.e., not being able to string together ideas in a normal way. Instead of following a logical path, my brain would follow random divergent trains of thought. I thought it would be cool if the player built responses to dialogue by searching through this web for a response. One way to think of it is that the words are like objectives, which suggests that there could also be obstacles to achieving these objectives. My idea for introducing obstacles was to include in the thought web some intrusive thoughts. I had been building a game engine since my last year of college called Opal, and figured I would use it because, as we all know, it's easier to make a game in your own engine. I won't go into too much detail about Opal here, but may make another video about it in the future if people seem interested. I built the prototype focusing on making the gameplay feel good. At first, the player was a white dot on screen that could move up and down with a linear speed. The next thing I did was add a line that followed the player to give you a sense that you're moving from left to right. Then I added an acceleration curve. This meant the player would gradually speed up as you held down the button instead of immediately jumping to max speed. This made the game feel much better. Once I had the movement down, I moved on to adding the words. To generate them, I used a noise function to make a smooth line. I placed words on different points in that line and made them move from right to left. It took some finesse to make it so that it was always possible to make it from one word to the next, but I managed to find a good combination of parameters for that. I also implemented a mechanic where certain words pull you in, and denoted those words by making them shake. In addition to the meaning of this mechanic, this made the game much more challenging, and added some variety to the sentence forming screen. I needed a structure to produce the rest of the game with. I knew the game would have conversations with different characters in the format of prompt and response. The responses are made up of sentence fragments that can be mixed and matched together to form different sentences. This means that we could theoretically make the game a branching narrative. But I do this very little in the actual game. It didn't make sense for me to imagine different paths that this story could go. I wanted to be honest. So I took this information and formulated an XML format for serializing stories. I should have quickly built a tool to make writing these XML documents easier, but for the first few months of development, I just wrote all the XML by hand. The layers of the XML structure look like this. There's a story file, which contains the progression of the story, which is just an ordered list of scenes, most of which are conversations. It also contains conversation data. Conversations are made up of many prompts, Every prompt has one or more trigger phrases and one response, and every response has one or more sentence fragments. I did eventually get around to making an editor, which I call Anchor. I made it as a Blazor web app with an SQL database. The app has different pages for each of the different parts of the story structure. There's a progression page, a conversation page, and on the conversation page you can edit all of the prompts and responses. Web development is what I do for my day job, so converting the XML format to schema was fairly straightforward, and so was making the UI mostly. But a big hurdle I had to jump over was the ability to import and export stories. I had to resort to using a little bit of JavaScript to upload and download files, but once I had this done, the app was pretty much ready to go. This tool dramatically sped up the writing process for the rest of the game, and gave me a more clear idea of how the scenes I was writing would look once in the game. Previously, I would write the dialogue in XML, then compile and play the game with a new story, realize that I'd made some mistakes in the XML, rewrite, rinse, and repeat. But with this tool, I could just visualize how everything would look in-game and rely on my code to produce correct XML. Making this game was really therapeutic for me. It helped me contextualize and structure my thoughts about a hard time in my life. If you found any of this interesting, please do check out the game on Steam through the link in the description. Thanks for watching.